Imagine boarding a plane with your 9-year-old daughter. Tickets in hand, seats assigned, hearts full of excitement for a new journey. Now imagine being told to leave, not because of a mistake, not because of safety, but because of the color of your skin. This is what happened to Olivia Grant, a powerful black CEO, and her little girl, Chloe. What should have been a routine flight turned into a national firestorm captured on camera, witnessed by hundreds, and watched by millions around the world. But here's the question that shook the conscience of a nation. Why was the truth of a child ignored? While the lies of privilege were believed, how could one ordinary flight spiral into corporate collapse, lawsuits, and an international movement for justice? Stay with me, because what began as humiliation inside an airplane cabin would soon topple careers, expose deep corruption, and spark changes that no one could have predicted. If you believe every voice deserves to be heard, hit like, share this story, and subscribe to our channel. Because what you're about to hear is more than a story. It's a wake-up call. Let's begin. The hum of Terminal 4 at JFK was its own kind of music, rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, the distant announcement of a final boarding call. Olivia Grant adjusted the strap of her leather carry-on and glanced down at her daughter, Chloe, whose 9-year-old eyes were wide, with the kind of excitement only a child could carry for flying. To Chloe, every airport was an adventure. To Olivia, it was another arena where she had learned to brace herself for scrutiny she had not earned. Their flight to Los Angeles was a late one. Olivia had booked first class not as a luxury, but as a necessity. The next morning she would step into a boardroom where billion-dollar decisions would be made, and she needed her rest. Chloe, who loved astronomy, had begged to sit by the window so she could see the stars as the plane climbed above the clouds. Olivia promised her they would, whispering that the best view was from seat 1A. As they approached the gate, Olivia kept her movements calm and deliberate, though she felt the usual tightness coil in her chest. It was the same quiet anxiety she always carried when entering spaces where she knew eyes might measure her worth before she spoke a word. She wore a navy blouse, pressed slacks, and carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who was used to commanding attention without demanding it. Still, she could feel glances flicking toward her as she reached for her boarding passes. "Good evening," Olivia said softly, passing the passes to the gate agent. Chloe held her mother's free hand, rocking back and forth on her heels. The agent looked down at the documents, then up at Olivia, then back again. Olivia had seen that double take too many times. It lasted only a second, but it left a shadow. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Grant," the agent said finally, forcing a smile. Olivia thanked her, guiding Chloe down the jet bridge. The cool gust of air from the plane's ventilation brushed against them as they stepped aboard. The first-class cabin glowed with the warm light of overhead lamps, the kind of space meant to feel serene and exclusive. Olivia led Chloe to their seats. Chloe's face lit up when she spotted the window seat, her small hands pressing against the glass even before she sat down. "Mom, look, we can see the wing from here." Chloe's voice carried the thrill of discovery. Olivia smiled, smoothing a wrinkle in her blouse as she stored her bag overhead. "You'll see even more once we're in the air." For a moment, it was perfect. Just a mother and daughter, tucked into the quiet of a plane that would soon climb into the night. But then, from 2 rows away, a voice sliced through the cabin. "Excuse me," came a sharp tone, coated with disbelief. "Those seats are mine." Olivia turned. Standing in the aisle was a woman dressed in pearls and a tailored cream jacket. Her blonde hair was pulled into a neat chignon, and her eyes scanned Olivia and Chloe as if she were studying an intrusion. This was Margaret Whitfield, though Olivia didn't know her name yet. All she knew was the expression one she had encountered in boardrooms, restaurants, hotel lobbies. It was the look of someone certain they belonged more than she did. "These seats are reserved for the Whitfields," the woman continued, her voice rising enough for nearby passengers to hear. Olivia's brows lifted slightly, though her tone remained even. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. My daughter and I are assigned to seats 1A and 1B. She tapped her boarding pass gently, not raising it like proof in a trial, but calmly, like someone stating the obvious. Margaret's lips curved into a tight smile. "First class?" she asked, as if the words themselves were suspicious. Her gaze dropped to Chloe, then back to Olivia. "Are you sure?" Olivia felt Chloe shift in her seat. The girl's hand tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," Chloe whispered, "why is she looking at us like that?" Olivia placed a steadying hand over Chloe's. "It's all right, sweetheart." Other passengers began to notice. Some glanced quickly away, burying themselves in magazines or screens. Others lingered on the scene, curiosity flickering in their eyes. The junior flight attendant, Rachel Kim, paused near the galley, her expression uncertain. She seemed to sense something was off, but hesitated to intervene. Olivia took a breath, quieting the thrum of anger that pressed against her ribs. Years of leadership had taught her that strength did not always mean volume. Sometimes it was the steadiness of staying calm when every nerve wanted to flare. "Ma'am," Olivia said evenly, "our tickets are correct. If there's an issue, the flight crew can verify." Margaret gave a soft laugh, the kind meant to gather allies. "Oh, I'll be asking them to verify. It just doesn't look right. That's all." Chloe blinked up at her mother, confusion clouding her excitement. "Mom, why doesn't she believe us? We have the tickets." Olivia's heart clenched, though her face remained composed. She brushed a strand of hair from Chloe's forehead, whispering, "Sometimes people don't see clearly, even when the truth is right in front of them." Chloe frowned, her small voice trembling. "But the truth is right here. Why can't she see it?" Olivia had no answer that would make sense to a child. She only knew that this flight, meant to be a simple journey west, had already become something heavier. From behind, the lead flight attendant approached Susan Parker. She carried herself with the clipped authority of someone who believed her judgment was rarely wrong. Her eyes swept the scene and landed on Olivia. "Is there a problem here?" Susan asked, her tone brisk. Margaret spoke first. "Yes. These two are in my family seats." Olivia opened her mouth, but Susan turned toward her, expectant, as if already leaning toward one side of the story. Olivia held up her boarding pass, calm but firm. "These are our assigned seats. I'm happy for you to check." The cabin air seemed to tighten. Chloe's small fingers gripped Olivia's hand more tightly. Somewhere in the back, Jason Lee, a young professional with quick instincts, shifted his phone subtly, already sensing a moment worth capturing. Olivia knew this was only the beginning. What she didn't know was just how far the ripples of this confrontation would spread far beyond the confines of Flight 847, far beyond the cabin lights glowing softly above them. But in that moment, she simply leaned closer to her daughter and said, softly but resolutely, "We belong here." The tension of the first clash lingered in the cabin like a faint storm cloud. Olivia settled into her seat, adjusting Chloe's blanket across her daughter's small lap, her every motion deliberate, calm. She would not give Margaret Whitfield the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Years of navigating boardrooms where she was the only black woman had taught Olivia that composure was sometimes her sharpest weapon. Yet she felt the weight of every glance flicking toward her, the hush of conversations that seemed to pause as they passed her row. Chloe leaned against her shoulder. "Mommy? She still keeps looking at us," she whispered, eyes darting toward Margaret, who sat 2 rows away with an expression carved of smug certainty. Olivia kissed her daughter's temple. "Let's just focus on our trip, sweetheart." But her own chest tightened. She could already sense what was coming. This was never about seats. It was about belonging. The lead flight attendant, Susan Parker, returned minutes later. Her stride was crisp, her lips pressed into a line that suggested she had already made her judgment. "Ma'am," she addressed Olivia, "may I see your boarding passes again?" Her tone carried the kind of politeness that wasn't a request, but a command dressed in courtesy. Olivia handed them over calmly, though her fingers curled slightly around the paper before releasing it. She noticed that Susan hadn't asked Margaret for hers. Not once. The inequity was sharp, unmistakable. Chloe noticed it too. "Why is she checking ours again?" Mom Chloe asked softly, confusion tugging at her words. Olivia smoothed her daughter's braids, buying herself a second to answer. "Sometimes people double-check things even when they don't need to," she murmured. But inside, her thoughts were sharper. No, not sometimes. Not with everyone. Only with people who look like us. Susan scanned the passes, then returned them without apology. "Thank you," she said quickly, moving on as if the matter were closed. Olivia kept her face serene, but her stomach turned. She knew the subtext. The doubt had been planted, not in the tickets, but in her right to sit in that seat. The small moments piled quickly. A male passenger across the aisle was greeted with warmth when he sat down. His ticket barely glanced out. The attendant even offered to hang his coat before he asked. Olivia watched the easy exchange and felt the sting of the double standard. Chloe noticed too, her young mind processing injustice in real time. Mom. How come he didn't have to show his ticket again? Chloe's tone was innocent, but her eyes carried hurt. Olivia swallowed, forcing herself to respond with gentleness, because not everyone gets treated the same way. "Chloe, and that's not your fault." The girl frowned. "But that's not fair." The words were simple, but in them lay the kind of clarity adults often buried under excuses. Olivia squeezed her hand. "You're right. It's not." Rachel Kim, the junior flight attendant, approached with a tray of pre-flight drinks. Her movements were softer, less rehearsed than Susan's. She set a glass of water in front of Chloe, adding a small napkin with a folded edge, almost like a secret kindness. Her eyes met Olivia's for a moment, as if to say, "I see what's happening. I don't agree with it." Olivia nodded once, gratitude passing between them without words. But Margaret wasn't finished. She leaned forward in her seat, her voice pitched just enough to carry to nearby passengers. "It's really unfortunate when the airline can't keep track of who belongs where. I suppose mistakes happen." Her gaze slid deliberately toward Olivia and Chloe, as though daring them to respond. Olivia kept her face turned toward the window, choosing silence over escalation. But inside her mind, a storm gathered. She thought of the years she had worked to build her company, of the sacrifices she had made, the nights she had stayed awake crunching numbers while Chloe slept beside her on the couch. She thought of the times she had walked into meetings and been mistaken for the assistant rather than the CEO. And now, here, in front of her daughter, It was happening again. The unspoken message, "You don't belong." Chloe shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, why is she saying that we do belong here?" Olivia turned to her daughter, her eyes soft but her voice steady. "Yes, we do, and no one gets to tell us otherwise." The announcement for final boarding echoed through the cabin. Passengers buckled in. Flight attendants hurried through last checks. Susan passed again, her eyes lingering on Olivia's row, as though waiting for an opportunity to question her once more. Olivia ignored the stare, focusing on Chloe, who leaned eagerly toward the window as the plane pushed back from the gate. The engines roared to life, vibrations thrumming beneath their feet. For a brief moment, Chloe's excitement overshadowed the tension. "We're moving! Mommy!" she exclaimed, her voice bright with wonder. Olivia smiled, letting that joy be the anchor she needed. "Yes, baby, we're going to fly." But Margaret couldn't resist. She leaned across the aisle, her tone dripping with condescension. "I just hope everything goes smoothly. Some people don't handle first class very well." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to hear. Olivia's jaw tightened. She wanted to respond, to defend, to push back. But then Chloe looked at her with wide eyes, waiting to see how her mother would react. Olivia inhaled slowly, holding her daughter's gaze. She knew this was bigger than a petty insult. This was a lesson for Chloe, one she wished her daughter never had to learn so young. She whispered, just loud enough for Chloe to hear, "Strength isn't about shouting the loudest. Sometimes it's about staying calm when others want you to lose control." Chloe nodded slowly, her small shoulders relaxing under her mother's hand. But her question lingered in the air, fragile yet piercing. "Mom, why do grown-ups believe her when she's lying? But they don't believe us when we're telling the truth." The question hit Olivia harder than any insult Margaret could throw. It was the distillation of everything she had endured, put into the pure words of a child. She had no easy answer. She could only hold Chloe close and whisper, "That's why we keep telling the truth, even when it's hard, because one day more people will listen." The plane lifted off, climbing into the night sky. The city lights below scattered like jewels, fading as they pierced through the clouds. Chloe pressed her forehead to the window, her eyes wide as the stars appeared, twinkling like tiny promises. "Mommy, look, the stars." Her voice was full of awe, untouched by bitterness. Olivia let herself smile, letting that moment of wonder soften the heaviness pressing on her chest. But Olivia knew the conflict wasn't over. The subtle dismissals were only the opening act. She could feel the air shifting, tension building toward something more. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Whatever came next, she would meet it with the same quiet strength she always had. For herself, for her daughter, for the truth. In the rows behind them, Jason Lee checked his phone, considering whether to start recording. His instincts told him this story wasn't done, and he was right. The storm had only begun to gather. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane leveled into its initial climb. Passengers settled into their seats, screens flickering to life, murmurs fading beneath the steady hum of the engines. For a moment, Olivia thought perhaps the worst of the tension had passed. Chloe leaned against the window, her small face pressed close to the glass as she whispered about the glowing skyline shrinking below. Olivia smoothed her daughter's blanket, letting herself exhale. But Margaret Whitfield had other plans. She shifted in her seat 2 rows up, twisting to look back with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and disdain. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she leaned into the aisle. "Excuse me," she said, her voice loud enough to ripple through the quiet cabin. "I'm going to have to insist that you move. Those seats belong to me and my husband." The words struck like a hammer in the still air. Heads turned. A businessman paused with his glass halfway to his lips. A young woman clutched her earbuds, uncertain whether to look or pretend she hadn't heard. Olivia felt Chloe stiffen beside her. The girl's eyes darted from Margaret to her mother, searching for reassurance. Olivia's voice was calm, almost serene. When she answered, "Our tickets are for 1A and 1B. There must be a mistake." Margaret scoffed. "Oh, I don't think so. We've flown this airline for years. We always have these seats. It's a family arrangement." She gestured vaguely toward the attendant call button, her manicured nails flashing. "I'll have them sorted out." Chloe tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering urgently, "Mommy, why is she saying that? We have the tickets." Her confusion trembled in her voice. Olivia squeezed her daughter's hand, steadying her. "We do, sweetheart, and the truth will hold." Susan Parker arrived almost instantly, her posture brisk, her eyes darting between the two women. Margaret seized the moment. "Finally," she said, exhaling dramatically, "these people are sitting in my seats. I need you to correct this immediately." The word people hung heavy, weighted with implication. Olivia's stomach clenched, but her face remained composed. She held out her boarding passes with the same quiet dignity she had shown before. "These are our assigned seats," she said evenly. Susan glanced at the passes, but didn't linger. Instead, she turned to Margaret. "Do you have your boarding passes, ma'am?" The question was gentle, almost deferential. Margaret smiled triumphantly, pulling a small leather clutch from her lap. She fussed with it for several seconds, then sighed theatrically. "Oh dear, my husband must have them. He handles all of that." She leaned back, unbothered. "But I shouldn't need to show anything. We always sit here." The double standard landed like a punch. Chloe saw it too, her young mind piecing together what she couldn't yet articulate. She whispered again, this time with a sharper edge. "Why do they believe her without proof? But they don't believe us with the tickets." Her words sliced through Olivia's heart. They were simple, honest, impossible to dismiss. Oh, Olivia stroked her daughter's hair. "Because sometimes, Chloe, people choose what they want to believe. But that doesn't make it true." Her voice was soft, but the weight of it filled the space between them. Susan hesitated, caught between protocol and perception. Her silence emboldened Margaret, who leaned farther into the aisle. "It's obvious what's happening here," she said, her tone sharp. "Some people just don't understand how first class works." The murmur of passengers grew louder. Some exchanged uncomfortable looks. A man in row 2 cleared his throat, shifting in his seat as if to intervene, then thought better of it. But not everyone stayed silent. Edward Barnes, the retired judge seated a row behind Olivia, finally spoke. His voice carried the authority of decades on the bench. "She's shown her tickets twice. They match the seats, unless you can produce your own. I'd say this matter is settled." Margaret's head snapped toward him, her eyes narrowing. "And who might you be?" Edward met her glare without flinching. "Someone who knows the difference between truth and entitlement." The word struck with the weight of gavel. A few passengers let out quiet murmurs of agreement. Margaret flushed but recovered quickly, smoothing her jacket. "Well, we'll see what the captain has to say," she huffed. "Jason Lee, The young professional, with his phone half hidden on his lap, had begun recording. His camera caught the tightening jaws, the pointed words, the trembling hands of a child who only wanted to look at the stars. He knew instinctively this was bigger than a seat dispute. This was something people needed to see. Chloe clung to her mother's arm. "Mommy, are they going to make us leave?" Olivia wrapped her arm around her daughter, pressing her close. "No one can take away what is ours. Chloe, remember that. Inside." Though Olivia's mind raced, she weighed her options, her heart pounding against her ribs. She could escalate, demand the captain immediately, risk frightening her daughter further. Or she could wait, allow the system to reveal its bias, and bear witness. Both paths were painful. Both carried consequences. She closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself. Calm was not weakness. Calm was control. Susan finally spoke. Her tone clipped. "I'll bring the captain. He can make the final decision." She turned and strode toward the cockpit, leaving behind a cabin thick with unease. Margaret leaned back with a self-satisfied smile, certain of victory. Olivia kept her eyes on Chloe. Whispering words meant only for her daughter. "Stay strong, my love. No matter what they say, we belong here, and the truth will rise." Chloe nodded, her small face pressed against her mother's arm, her innocence colliding with the harshness of adult prejudice. Around them, silence returned. But it was not peaceful. It was the silence of anticipation, of passengers waiting to see what justice would look like 30,000 feet in the air. For Olivia, it was the silence before the storm. The murmur of restless passengers filled the first-class cabin as Susan Parker marched toward the cockpit. Olivia could feel the shift in the air, a kind of tightening that always comes before a decision is handed down. Chloe pressed closer to her side, small fingers digging into her mother's hand. Olivia stroked her daughter's hair with steady calm, though her own stomach twisted. She had spent her life preparing for battles in boardrooms and contracts, but she had never imagined having to fight for dignity while seated on an airplane beside her child. When Susan returned, she wasn't alone. Captain William Harris stepped into the cabin, his crisp uniform pressed, his hat tucked under one arm. He carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience. Olivia recognized the type immediately. The kind of man who believed his word was law, even when that law bent toward convenience rather than justice. "What seems to be the problem here?" the captain asked, his voice steady but clipped. His eyes moved first to Susan, then to Margaret Whitfield, as though instinctively seeking their accounts before addressing Olivia. Margaret wasted no time. She stood slightly in the aisle, her pearls gleaming under the cabin light. "Captain, these people are sitting in our seats. We always fly here, my husband and I. It's outrageous that the airline allowed this confusion." Olivia felt the sting of those words. These people. The phrasing was deliberate, dismissive. She inhaled deeply, quieting the anger that rose in her chest, and produced the boarding passes once more. Her voice was calm but resolute. "These seats are assigned to me and my daughter. We've already shown our passes multiple times." Chloe tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering nervously, "Mom, he doesn't believe us either." Olivia pressed a gentle kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Let's wait and see, sweetheart." But inside she feared her daughter's instinct was right. The captain accepted the boarding passes with a practiced hand, barely glancing at them before nodding curtly. He turned to Susan. "What's the status?" Susan's tone carried a hint of exasperation. "They've shown these twice, sir. But Mrs. Whitfield insists these seats belong to her family. Harris's gaze shifted back to Margaret, who simply lifted her chin and folded her arms. "That's correct," she said confidently, as though her word alone carried more weight than written proof. Edward Barnes, the retired judge, spoke up from his seat. "Captain, I've witnessed this entire exchange. The Grant family has the proper tickets. Mrs. Whitfield has yet to show hers." His words rang clear, resonant, but Harris gave him only a cursory nod before turning back to Olivia. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Passengers held their breath, waiting for the verdict. Finally, Harris exhaled, "For the sake of the flight and everyone's comfort, I think it's best if you and your daughter deplane. Ma'am, we can resolve this at the gate." The word struck Olivia like a blow. Chloe's small gasp echoed the devastation that swept through her chest. She stared at the captain, disbelief flooding her face. "But these are our seats," Chloe said, her young voice breaking. "Why won't you believe us?" Olivia pulled her daughter close, wrapping her in her arms. Every instinct screamed to fight, to shout, to demand justice. But she also saw Chloe's trembling shoulders, felt her little heart racing against her own chest. She knew this choice wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about showing her daughter how to endure when the world closed its eyes to the truth. Her voice was steady, though sorrow pressed at its edges. "Captain, with all due respect, you are asking the wrong passengers to leave. We have the right to these seats. We have the documents. Yet you are choosing to believe words without evidence over tickets with proof. Is this truly the standard you want to set for your crew and your passengers?" The cabin hushed again. Some heads nodded subtly. Others looked away, unwilling to confront the injustice playing out before them. Margaret smiled, victory flashing in her eyes. Finally, some order," she said smugly. Harris did not address her directly. Instead, he shifted awkwardly, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but my decision is final. Please gather your belongings." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. She looked up at her mother, voice trembling. "Did we do something wrong?" Mommy Olivia's heart broke at the question. She cupped her daughter's face, wiping away a tear with her thumb. "No, my love. We did everything right. Sometimes the world doesn't see the truth right away. But we know it, and that matters." She rose slowly, her every movement deliberate, graceful, refusing to let them see her defeated. She retrieved her bag from the overhead bin, helping Chloe with her small backpack. The walk down the aisle stretched endlessly, each step echoing with humiliation. Passengers watched in silence, some ashamed, some complicit. Jason Lee's phone recorded steadily, capturing every glance, every whispered comment, every tear streaking Chloe's cheek. As Olivia reached the door of the cabin, she paused. She turned once more, her eyes sweeping the space that had denied her dignity. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but laced with iron. "The truth doesn't disappear just because you choose to ignore it." Then she stepped into the jet bridge, her daughter's hand in hers. Behind them, the cabin stirred with unease. Margaret reclined smugly in her seat. Susan busied herself with final checks, and Captain Harris returned to the cockpit. But the silence left in Olivia's wake was heavy. It carried the weight of injustice, the sting of complicity, and the quiet power of a truth that would not stay buried. As they entered the terminal, Chloe looked up with eyes brimming with confusion. "Mommy, if we were right, why did they make us leave?" Olivia knelt to meet her gaze. brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Because sometimes, Chloe, people choose what is easy over what is right, but that doesn't mean we stop standing for the truth. Chloe leaned into her mother's embrace, her small voice muffled against Olivia's blouse. Will they ever learn to see us? Mommy Olivia held her tightly, her eyes burning with unshed tears. One day, my love, and we will help make that day come. The two of them stood there in the terminal, mother and daughter framed against the glow of departure screens and the hum of the airport. They had been removed from a flight, but not from their dignity. Olivia knew this was not the end of the story. This was the beginning of a fight that would reach far beyond the aisles of a single airplane. The terminal buzzed with the usual airport chaos, but for Olivia Grant and her daughter Chloe, the sounds blurred into a dull hum of voices, rolling suitcases, and boarding calls. They sat side by side on a row of cold plastic chairs, Chloe leaning against her mother's shoulder, trying to hide her tears from the world. Olivia stroked her daughter's hair, her mind racing between anger, sorrow, and the stubborn resolve that had guided her through boardroom wars far harsher than this. Yet this felt different. This wasn't about a contract, or market share, or quarterly earnings. This was about dignity, about the innocence of her daughter already being scarred by a world too quick to doubt them. Across the gate area, Jason Lee adjusted his phone, whispering into the camera as he streamed live. This is unbelievable. They just kicked a mother and her young daughter out of first class, even though their tickets were correct. You all saw the passes. This isn't confusion, it's discrimination, and people need to know. Thousands of comments scrolled across his screen, outrage spilling into words typed furiously by strangers who, in minutes, would amplify Olivia's story far beyond the walls of this terminal. Olivia noticed Jason's camera out of the corner of her eye but said nothing. She had spent her life in the public eye, though most people had no idea who she was until her name appeared on Forbes lists or financial news tickers. But she wasn't ready to reveal herself yet. What mattered now was Chloe, the little girl sitting beside her, drawing shaky circles on the sleeve of her dress with her finger, as though trying to soothe herself. "Mom," Chloe whispered, "what if everyone thinks we lied?" Olivia cupped her daughter's face, her thumb wiping away a stray tear. "The truth doesn't need everyone's belief. Chloe, it just needs us to hold on to it." Passengers still inside the aircraft were not as silent as Susan Parker or Captain Harris hoped. Edward Barnes remained in his seat, his sharp eyes scanning the cabin. When Margaret Whitfield reclined smugly, he leaned toward her. "Mrs. Whitfield, do you realize you've committed fraud in front of dozens of witnesses?" Margaret scoffed, dismissing him with a wave of her manicured hand. "Spare me your lecture. Judge Barnes, people like you always want to turn simple inconveniences into federal cases." Barnes's jaw tightened. He pulled out a small notepad, an old habit from decades on the bench, and began to write. Across the aisle, Rachel Kim, the junior flight attendant who had watched the entire ordeal unfold, felt her stomach knot with shame. She wanted to intervene, to tell the captain he had made a mistake. But fear kept her quiet. She thought about her job, her bills, her probationary status at the airline, yet she also thought about Chloe's tear-streaked face, and the way Olivia had stood tall even as the captain dismissed her. Conscience whispered that silence would make her complicit. She pressed her hands together and whispered a quiet prayer that truth would find its way. Meanwhile, Jason's live stream gained momentum. Within 10 minutes, it had been shared by local bloggers, then retweeted by civil rights advocates, then picked up by small news outlets hungry for breaking stories. Strangers at other gates began pulling out their phones, pointing toward the first-class jet bridge, whispering to each other. A young woman walked past Olivia, paused, and whispered softly, "I saw the video. I'm so sorry." Her words were brief, but Chloe looked up, a flicker of relief softening her eyes. For a moment, she knew at least one person believed them. Inside the cockpit, Captain Harris sat in the left seat, staring at the instrument panel but hearing none of the pre-flight chatter. He had made his decision, and the flight attendants were following his orders. But unease gnawed at him. He was a man who prized efficiency, who hated delays, who lived by schedules. But he was not blind. He had seen the tears in Chloe's eyes, the quiet composure on Olivia's face. Something about it unsettled him, yet admitting error in front of his crew felt impossible. He pushed the thought aside and called for final cabin checks. Back in the terminal, Chloe tugged at her mother's sleeve again. "Can we go home?" Mommy Olivia looked down at her daughter, her own heart breaking. But she also knew walking away now would send the wrong message. They weren't just passengers anymore. They had become symbols, whether they had asked for it or not. She placed her hand over Chloe's and said softly, "Not yet. Sometimes you have to stand still long enough for the world to notice what it has done." Chloe didn't understand, not fully, but she nodded, trusting her mother's calm. Then came the first phone call. Olivia's personal phone buzzed with the familiar number of her chief of staff. She hesitated, her thumb hovering above the screen. If she answered, if she allowed her world to intersect with this injustice, everything would change. She would no longer be just Olivia Grant, mother protecting her daughter. She would become Olivia Grant, CEO of one of the largest logistics firms in the country, a woman whose company held contracts with airlines, governments, and multinational corporations. She exhaled slowly and silenced the call. "Not yet," she thought. "Let them reveal themselves fully before I do." In the cabin, murmurs grew louder as passengers whispered about the decision to remove Olivia and Chloe. Some scrolled on their phones, showing each other Jason's live stream already trending under the hashtag Downward Justice for Chloe. Susan Parker moved briskly through the aisle, trying to maintain control, but she could feel authority slipping. She caught sight of Rachel Kim whispering to another attendant and snapped, "Eyes forward. Rachel, don't forget who gives the orders here." Rachel swallowed her words, but her conscience burned hotter. She glanced at her watch, counting down the minutes until she could no longer stay silent. Meanwhile, Margaret Whitfield's smugness faltered as she noticed passengers glaring at her, whispering harsh words behind cupped hands. Even Thomas Whitfield, seated quietly beside her, shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tie. He leaned toward his wife and whispered urgently, "Margaret, this is spiraling. Maybe we should—" She cut him off with a glare. "Don't you dare back down. We belong here." "They don't." But Thomas's eyes betrayed doubt, the first crack in the armor of entitlement. By the time the boarding door closed, Jason's video had reached 50,000 viewers. Civil rights lawyers were tweeting that they wanted to represent Olivia and Chloe. Influencers demanded accountability, and passengers across the terminal were raising their phones, capturing every angle, every gesture, every word. The weight of witnesses had shifted. Olivia could feel it even without looking at the screens. The tide was turning, and for the first time since stepping off the plane, she allowed herself the faintest smile. She squeezed Chloe's hand gently. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Chloe frowned, confused. "Feel what?" Olivia leaned close, her voice soft as silk, the truth catching up. Chloe tilted her head, still uncertain, but her tears slowed. She tucked herself against her mother's arm, letting the warmth of hope replace the sting of humiliation. What neither of them knew yet was that within minutes, the situation would no longer be confined to Gate C-17. Screens across the airport, across the country, would flicker with their story. Executives in corner offices would see their faces, and the very people who dismissed them so easily inside that plane would soon find themselves answering questions they could not ignore. By the time the gate agents closed the doors of Flight 982, the storm outside the cabin had already begun. In the terminal, passengers whispered among themselves, heads bowed over glowing screens as Jason Lee's livestream multiplied across social platforms. Olivia sat quietly beside Chloe, her arm wrapped protectively around her daughter, as if her calm presence could shield the child from the tidal wave of injustice still crashing in her small heart. Chloe drew hesitant shapes in her notebook, her crayon squeaking faintly as she tried to process what words could not yet hold. Olivia's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't her chief of staff. It was her sister, calling from Chicago. Olivia stared at the screen, debating. She wanted to pretend this was just another inconvenience, something she could handle and move past. But she knew it was already beyond that. With a slow breath, she answered. Her sister's voice poured out, sharp and anxious. Liv, you're all over the internet. I just saw a video tell me it isn't true. Tell me they didn't make you leave the plane? Olivia closed her eyes, her free hand tightening on Chloe's shoulder. It's true, she said simply. Silence stretched on the other end, before her sister whispered, Oh, Liv, and Chloe too. Yes, Olivia replied, her voice low but steady. But we'll be all right. I need you not to panic. The truth will take care of itself. She hung up before the conversation could spiral, unwilling to let Chloe hear fear in her aunt's voice. Meanwhile, inside the plane, cracks were forming. Margaret Whitfield reclined in her seat, her smile tight, her fingers drumming on the armrest as though each tap could erase the glares directed her way. Thomas sat rigidly beside her, his tie loosened, his jaw clenched. For years he had benefited from silence, ignoring the uneasy comments his wife made at dinners or the dismissive gestures she used toward staff. But now silence was dangerous. He leaned closer, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Margaret, this isn't going away. People are filming. It's everywhere. She shot him a sharp glance. So what, they'll forget by tomorrow? They always do. But Thomas wasn't convinced. He had seen the way Jason's phone glowed, the whispers of other passengers, the heavy stare of Edward Barnes still fixed on them. He felt the first chill of consequence creeping into his veins. Rachel Kim busied herself with small tasks, straightening napkins, checking trays, but her conscience screamed louder than any checklist. She had seen Olivia's tickets, had witnessed the truth, and had stayed silent out of fear. Every time she passed by Margaret's seat, she saw Chloe's tear-streaked face in her memory, and shame tightened around her chest like a vice. At the back of the cabin, she pulled out her phone during a quiet moment, her fingers hovering over the airline's internal reporting app. She typed a few words, hesitated, then erased them. Courage battled fear, and fear still held the upper hand. For now. At the front of the plane, Captain Harris received a message from dispatch. His first officer passed him the printed slip with a furrowed brow. Captain, it looks like this incident is already trending. Headquarters wants an update. Harris rubbed his temple. He was a man who thrived on control, who believed every situation had a clean solution if one stuck to the rules. But this was no longer about rules. It was about perception, reputation, and judgment calls. He thought of Olivia's calm words, the ones that had carried both pain and dignity. For the first time in years, he wondered if his instincts had failed him. Back in the terminal, Chloe put her notebook down and looked at her mother with wide, searching eyes. "Mommy, why did they listen to her when she didn't even have the papers? We showed ours. Isn't proof supposed to matter?" Olivia paused, her throat tightening. She wanted to tell her daughter that proof always mattered, the truth always prevailed. But she could not lie. "Proof does matter," she said softly. "But sometimes people see what they want to see. They trust what feels familiar to them, even when it's wrong." Chloe's lip trembled. "So they didn't believe us because of who we are?" The question sliced through Olivia like glass. She pulled her daughter close, pressing her forehead against Chloe's hair. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes that happens. But it doesn't mean we stop telling the truth. It means we make sure the world learns to listen." Jason approached carefully, his phone lowered now, his voice respectful. "Ma'am, I just wanted you to know, your story is already everywhere. People are outraged. You're not alone." Olivia studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes gauging his sincerity. He looked nervous but earnest, the weight of what he had captured dawning on him. She nodded once. "Thank you. But remember, this is not just a story. This is my daughter's life. Treat it with the respect it deserves." Jason swallowed hard and nodded again. "I promise." An announcement echoed through the terminal, calling passengers for another flight. The ordinary rhythm of the airport continued, but Olivia knew nothing about this day was ordinary anymore. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an email alert. Her name had already begun circulating online. Someone had recognized her, piecing together the details. She was no longer just a mother wronged on a flight. She was Olivia Grant, CEO, a woman whose reputation and resources carried weight. The stakes had shifted. She glanced down at Chloe, who had begun drawing again, sketching a little figure with a cape standing in front of a much taller, scowling figure. "It's you, Mommy," Chloe whispered shyly. "You're the hero." Olivia's heart swelled with both pride and sorrow. No baby girl. Heroes are the ones who tell the truth even when no one believes them. That was you, on board. Thomas Whitfield's phone buzzed with messages from colleagues. He glanced at the screen, his stomach dropping as he read headlines already forming. Passenger removed from flight in suspected racial bias incident. His company's name appeared in some of the threads, linked to his wife's behavior. He shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat forming at his temple. "Margaret," he whispered harshly, "this is serious. If this goes further, it could hit my job." Margaret waved him off. But a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes. She had always believed her entitlement was untouchable. Now, for the first time, she felt the ground shift beneath her. Rachel Kim finally made her choice. She slipped into the galley, opened the reporting app, and typed a full account of what she had seen. Her hands trembled as she hit send, but relief washed over her. The truth was out there now, documented inside the system as well as outside. Whatever came next, she would not be silent. Back in the terminal, Olivia rose to her feet, lifting Chloe's small backpack onto her shoulder. She no longer looked like a passenger stranded in the chaos of an airline's failure. She looked like a woman preparing for battle. She knew the world was watching, and she intended to make sure they learned something from what they saw. She leaned down to Chloe and whispered, "Are you ready to keep going?" Chloe looked up, her eyes still wet but steady. "Yes, Mommy, I want them to know the truth." Olivia smiled, pride glowing through her exhaustion. "Then that's what we'll do." As they walked through the terminal together, heads turned, phones lifted, whispers followed. But Olivia's stride remained unbroken, her grip on Chloe's hand firm. Behind her calm exterior, her mind sharpened. The cracks were showing not just in the airline's facade, but in the Whitfield's entitlement, in the captain's certainty, in the silence of those who had once looked away. Truth was pushing through, and once it had light, it would not be hidden again. By the time Olivia and Chloe reached the airline's customer service lounge, the story was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to millions of strangers scrolling through phones in coffee shops, offices, and living rooms across the country. Screens everywhere carried Jason Lee's video of the quiet mother and her trembling daughter being asked to leave their rightful seats. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Justice for Chloe. Believe the boarding pass. Flying while black. In less than an hour. What had started as a confrontation between two women in first class had become a national conversation. The customer service manager, a weary man named Daniel Cross, ushered Olivia and Chloe into a private office with the nervous energy of someone who understood the storm brewing but lacked the tools to stop it. "Ms. Grant," he began, his voice faltering, "I want to personally apologize for what happened. We are working on a resolution." Olivia raised an eyebrow, her composure unshaken. "A resolution," she repeated slowly, the word tasting hollow. Chloe sat beside her, clutching her notebook as though it were armor. Olivia's calm unnerved Daniel. He had handled angry customers, even threatening ones, but never someone so controlled, so steady, as if she carried an entire courtroom inside her. He cleared his throat again. "We'd like to rebook you immediately." "Of course. First class on the next available flight. Vouchers. Accommodations." Olivia stopped him with a slight raise of her hand. "This is not about upgrades or vouchers. My daughter has just learned that truth can be dismissed and innocence can be humiliated, all while evidence is ignored. Do you understand the depth of that harm?" Daniel blinked, realizing with dread that no script in his training manual could help him here. Meanwhile, in the cabin of Flight 9A2, tension simmered. Passengers whispered about what they had seen, refreshing their phones to watch the video circulate. Margaret Whitfield shifted in her seat, her earlier confidence slipping as she caught the sharp stares aimed her way. Even the attendants avoided her gaze. She leaned toward Thomas, her voice strained. "Why are they all looking at me like that?" Thomas's phone buzzed on the tray table. He glanced down, and his face drained of color. His company's name was trending, tied directly to the viral video. Someone had already identified him, linking his role as vice president to the actions of his wife. He turned to her, his voice low and urgent. "Margaret, this is bigger than you realize. This could ruin me." She scoffed, but her eyes flickered with doubt. "They'll move on. They always do." But Thomas wasn't sure. He felt the weight of a career, a reputation, and perhaps even his livelihood trembling beneath the force of the internet's spotlight. Rachel Kim sat in the galley, scrolling through the live feed on her break. Each comment she read pierced deeper into her conscience. People were outraged, calling for accountability, naming the injustice she had silently witnessed. She closed her eyes, guilt gnawing at her. She had finally filed her report, but it felt like a drop in a tidal wave. Still, She whispered a silent promise to herself she would not let this truth be buried. In the office. Olivia's phone rang. The caller ID made her pause. It was her attorney, a man she trusted not just with contracts, but with the integrity of her company. She hesitated, then answered, "Olivia." His voice came without preamble. "I've been watching this unfold. You know what this is, don't you? This is textbook discrimination. You have grounds for a lawsuit that could change federal policy. 8 figures, easily. But more than that, real reform." Olivia's jaw tightened. She glanced at Chloe, who was busy coloring a cape onto the small superhero figure in her notebook. "This is about my daughter," she said quietly. "She needs to know the world is capable of justice, not just payouts and settlements." Her attorney's voice softened. "Then let's make sure the world learns that lesson." Chloe looked up suddenly, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Mommy, why is everyone talking about us?" Olivia hesitated, then showed her daughter the screen of her phone. The video of their removal had reached 500,000 views. Chloe's small gasp filled the room. "Are we famous now?" she asked innocently. Olivia knelt beside her, taking her hands gently. "No, Chloe, we're visible. There's a difference. People are paying attention because what happened to us shows them something wrong that has been happening to others for a long time." Chloe furrowed her brow, processing the distinction with the seriousness only children can summon. "So if they listen to us, maybe they'll listen to other kids too." Olivia's throat tightened. She kissed her daughter's forehead. "Exactly." Across the country, news anchors began picking up the story. Cable networks played Jason's footage on loop. Commentators debating on air whether airlines had systemic bias. Civil rights leaders tweeted their support, demanding investigations. Corporate sponsors of the airline began calling, worried about association. Inside the company's crisis management office, phones rang without pause. Executives huddled around screens, watching their stock price dip in real time. What had started as a flight delay was now a corporate nightmare. Back on the plane, Edward Barnes sat with his arms folded, his sharp eyes never leaving Margaret. He leaned forward just enough for his words to carry. "Mrs. Whitfield, I hope you understand that lies unravel faster than ever in this age. You may believe you've won, but justice has a way of catching up." Margaret turned toward him, her cheeks flushed. "You don't know me," she hissed. "I know enough," he replied calmly. His voice carried the steady authority of a man who had passed judgment on countless liars before. The truth in his tone silenced her more effectively than any outburst could. At that same moment, Olivia's phone buzzed with another call. This time it was from an executive assistant in Phoenix. The voice on the other end was tense, hurried. "Ms. Grant, Mr. William Hartman, our CEO, insists on speaking with you immediately. It's about tomorrow's acquisition meeting." Olivia's eyes narrowed. The pieces clicked into place. Margaret's husband worked for the very company she was scheduled to negotiate with. The irony almost made her laugh. Almost. She glanced at Chloe, then at Daniel Cross, who shifted nervously under her gaze. "Put him through," Olivia said firmly. William Hartman's voice came on the line, strained with urgency. "Ms. Grant, I just saw the footage. I need to personally apologize for what happened. Margaret's behavior is unacceptable, and Thomas's connection to our company only makes this worse. Please know this does not reflect our values. We are already taking action." Olivia let silence stretch before she replied, her voice even but sharp. "Mr. Hartman, tomorrow we were scheduled to discuss a partnership. Now we may be discussing whether that partnership is even possible." Chloe watched her mother closely, sensing the shift in her tone. Olivia's words carried not just pain, but power, and her daughter seemed to absorb both. Outside the office, the airport felt different now. Passengers glanced toward the glass walls, where television screens displayed headlines about the incident unfolding only a few gates away. Some pointed, whispering Olivia's name as they recognized her. Chloe tugged at her mother's hand, nervous. "Mommy, are people going to be mad at us?" Olivia crouched down, locking eyes with her daughter. "No, baby girl, they're mad at what was done to us. There's a difference. And sometimes, being the one who tells the truth means people will watch you closely. That's not anger, it's attention, and we'll use it for good." By nightfall, the video had reached millions. Strangers lit up social feeds with solidarity, sharing their own stories of discrimination while traveling. Olivia's inbox filled with messages from allies, colleagues, even competitors offering support. But she remained grounded in one truth. None of it mattered if Chloe lost faith that justice was possible. She held her daughter close as they left the office, stepping back into the noisy terminal. Chloe looked up at her, eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "Mommy, are we going to fix this?" Olivia kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "We already started." The night deepened around JFK, but the terminal buzzed as though daylight still clung to the glass walls. Olivia and Chloe sat in a quieter corner now, away from the gawking crowds and glowing phones. But there was no true escape. The story had grown too large, too fast. Strangers whispered her name with reverence and anger, their screens flashing her image. Chloe's frightened face frozen in pixels that traveled the globe. Olivia kept her composure, though inside she wrestled with the burden of being both protector and symbol. At corporate headquarters across the country, the airline's crisis room pulsed with panic. Executives huddled around a long table, screens displaying trending hashtags and financial reports. A vice president of communications wiped sweat from his brow as he spoke. "The video has crossed 20 million views. We've had calls from 3 senators, the Department of Transportation, and at least 6 major sponsors demanding answers. We need a statement immediately." The CEO of the airline, a woman named Linda Carver, pressed her palms flat against the table. Her voice was sharp with controlled fury. "We cannot deny what happened. The footage is undeniable. Find the captain, the lead flight attendant, everyone involved, and suspend them until further notice." She glanced at the general counsel. "Prepare for litigation, because it's coming." Silence fell over the room, broken only by the clatter of keyboards as staff drafted statements, scrambled for damage control, and tried to contain a fire already raging beyond their reach. On Flight 982 still airborne, Margaret Whitfield fidgeted in her seat. Her earlier smugness dissolved into unease. Passengers stared openly now, some whispering, others filming her with open defiance. Thomas sat rigid beside her, his phone buzzing nonstop with messages from colleagues and superiors. He turned to her with fury in his eyes. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My career is in jeopardy because of you. The board already called. They're reviewing my position." Margaret's lips trembled, though pride still forced her chin upward. "I was only protecting what's ours." Thomas shook his head. "What you were protecting was your ego, and now it might cost me everything." His words cut deeper than he intended, leaving her silent at last, her shoulders sagging as whispers around them grew louder. Back in the terminal, Chloe rested her head on Olivia's lap, fighting sleep as her mother gently stroked her hair. The child's voice was soft, heavy with drowsiness, but still filled with worry. "Mommy, are they going to say sorry to us?" Olivia looked down, her heart aching at the innocence in that question. "They will, Chloe. But more important than their words will be their actions. We will watch what they do." Chloe nodded faintly before drifting toward sleep, her breathing evening out against her mother's arm. Olivia sat still, eyes fixed on the distance, her mind sharpening. She knew what it meant to be thrust into the spotlight. Public outrage was powerful, but fleeting. If real change was to come from this, it needed to be harnessed deliberately. She would not let this become just another viral headline that faded by morning. Jason Lee returned quietly, his phone finally lowered. His expression carried the weight of someone realizing he had helped ignite a movement. "Ms. Grant," he said softly, "the video is everywhere. People are asking for your name, your statement. Do you want to speak on camera?" Olivia studied him, her sharp eyes unwavering. "Not yet. Right now. This is about truth, not identity. If I step forward, it will become about who I am instead of what was done. The world needs to see the injustice before it sees the resume." Jason nodded, guilt flickering in his gaze. "I just want you to know. I didn't mean to put you in danger." Olivia's tone softened, though her words were firm. "You didn't put me in danger. You showed the world what danger looks like when truth is ignored. Just remember, Jason, visibility carries responsibility. Use it wisely." His throat tightened as he nodded again, her words etching themselves into his conscience. At that same hour, in a sleek downtown tower in Los Angeles, Thomas Whitfield's board convened an emergency call. The chairman's voice cut through the static of the line. "Thomas, your wife's behavior has put the company at risk. Our brand is being dragged into headlines we cannot afford. Until further notice, you are relieved of your duties pending review." Thomas closed his eyes, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of a career unraveling in real time. Margaret turned toward him, horror etched across her face. "They can't do that." He shook his head, bitterness rising. "They just did." The silence between them stretched like a chasm, each realizing for the first time that entitlement had a cost. Meanwhile, Rachel Kim sat in the crew rest area of the aircraft, her hands trembling as she typed on her phone. She had just received a message from a fellow attendant. The airline was requesting written accounts. She inhaled deeply, then began to write everything she had seen, sparing no detail. She wrote about Olivia's calm, Chloe's tears, Margaret's arrogance, Susan's bias, the captain's dismissal. When she finished, she read it twice, then hit send. For the first time since boarding that flight, she felt a measure of peace. She had spoken the truth, and no fear could erase that now. At the customer service lounge, Daniel Cross returned with pale cheeks and nervous hands. "Ms. Grant," he began, "corporate has asked me to tell you they are issuing a formal apology. They're preparing a press release." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "An apology written by lawyers will not teach my daughter that justice exists. You tell corporate this, they will not bury this under a press statement. There will be accountability, and until that happens, I will not be silent." Daniel swallowed hard, nodding, sensing that he was standing before someone who was far more than just a passenger. As dawn approached on the East Coast, morning news programs lit up with the story. Clips of Olivia and Chloe circulated beside expert commentary. Civil rights leaders called for hearings. Lawyers announced intentions to file lawsuits. and politicians weighed in with statements of support. Strangers across the country posted their own travel stories, adding fuel to a growing firestorm. Olivia's name was now public knowledge, her face recognized. Chloe's innocent question, "Why don't they believe us?" had been repeated thousands of times online, echoing as a haunting indictment of systemic prejudice. In her hotel room later that morning, Olivia watched the coverage silently as Chloe slept beside her. For the first time since stepping off that plane, her shoulders relaxed slightly. She knew the road ahead would be long and exhausting, filled with courtrooms, press conferences, and endless commentary. But she also knew that something irreversible had happened. The facade had cracked. The world had seen the truth, and once seen, it could not be unseen. She brushed a strand of hair from Chloe's face, whispering softly, "Rest, my love. Tomorrow we rise again." Chloe stirred faintly, her hand clutching her mother's even in sleep. Olivia closed her eyes, letting the hum of the city outside fade. The battle was only beginning, but she was ready. For her daughter. For the truth. For everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. By the time the sun reached its late morning height, Olivia found herself standing in front of a mirror inside a modest hotel room, pressing the lapels of her blazer into place. She had barely slept, but fatigue was hidden behind practiced composure. Years of boardrooms and negotiations had taught her how to mask exhaustion, how to turn inner turmoil into a steady gaze that made others falter before her silence. Chloe sat on the bed, legs crossed, doodling in her sketchbook with a seriousness that mirrored her mother's. The child's drawing showed an airplane, passengers of every shade sitting together peacefully, and at the front, a captain smiling without judgment. Olivia's chest tightened as she looked at it. Her daughter was drawing a world she wished to believe in, one Olivia herself still struggled to trust. A knock on the door startled them both. Daniel Cross stood outside, tie askew, his face pale with the weight of responsibility. He carried a folder in one hand and a phone in the other. "Ms. Grant," he said with a trembling voice, "corporate is begging for a meeting. They've prepared a statement. They want you to approve it before they release it publicly." Olivia regarded him coolly. Approve their apology, or become complicit in their denial. Daniel hesitated. "They're scared. Ma'am, they know the world is watching, but they also know the courts will be watching too." Olivia closed her eyes for a brief moment. Her mind replayed every humiliating detail, every tear Chloe had shed. She had choices, and she knew the weight of each one. She could accept their offer quietly, secure compensation, and move on. Or she could refuse, stepping directly into the storm, risking everything to force an industry to reckon with itself. She looked back at her daughter. Chloe's eyes, large and trusting, met hers. The decision solidified. "Tell them I'll meet," Olivia said finally. "But understand this, if they expect a performance, they'll be disappointed. I will speak my truth, not their script." Daniel nodded weakly, both relieved and terrified, and retreated with the folder still clutched against his chest. Across the country, in the Whitfield household, chaos reigned. Margaret sat in their dining room, staring at the glow of her phone as hate-filled messages poured in, each one sharper than the last. Her once perfect reputation in her social circle was disintegrating in real time. Thomas entered, still in yesterday's suit, his tie discarded, his expression hollow. He dropped a letter onto the table. "It's official. I'm out." Margaret blinked. her voice cracking. They fired you. His laugh was bitter and sharp. They didn't even use the word fired. Terminated with cause. Do you understand what that means? Not just gone from the company, Margaret, gone from the industry. Every potential employer will see those words and know why. Margaret's lips parted in horror. But I didn't mean for this. He cut her off with a glare that froze her in place. You meant every word you said on that plane, and now we pay the price. At the airline's Manhattan office, the scene resembled a battlefield. Lawyers shuffled papers, PR executives barked instructions, and analysts tracked stock prices plummeting in real time. Linda Carver, the CEO, stood at the center of it all, her posture commanding even as fatigue shadowed her eyes. We are no longer in damage control, she declared to the room. We are in survival mode. The only way out is through accountability. Draft the suspensions, prepare the settlements. And for God's sake, make sure our employees know this will never happen again. Her team scribbled furiously. Though some faces betrayed doubt, Linda noticed it but did not falter. If we don't transform now, we will not survive. Understand that. That afternoon, Olivia entered a glass-walled conference room where cameras were already positioned. Chloe remained outside with Rachel Kim, who had volunteered to sit with her, bringing juice and paper to distract her from the heavy moment. Olivia walked slowly to the head of the table, Daniel trailing nervously behind. At the far end sat Linda Carver, flanked by attorneys and PR staff. Linda stood, extending a hand. Ms. Grant, thank you for coming. I want to begin by apologizing personally. Olivia accepted the handshake, her face impassive. Apologies are easy. Change is not. Which are you offering? Linda exhaled sharply. Both, if you'll let us. Olivia took her seat, her eyes scanning the prepared documents before pushing them aside. You don't need my approval for words that won't heal. You need my commitment to truth, if you're brave enough to accept it. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. Then tell us what accountability looks like to you. Olivia's voice carried through the room, measured and unwavering. Accountability looks like transparency. Every detail of what happened to me and my daughter will be documented publicly. Every employee who enabled this will face consequences, and every policy that allowed this to happen will be rewritten with oversight that does not come from your boardroom alone. You want to make this right. Then you give victims a seat at the table where decisions are made. The room shifted uneasily, lawyers exchanging glances, PR staff scribbling. Linda did not break eye contact. You're asking us to change the very core of how we operate. Olivia leaned forward, her tone steely. I'm not asking. I'm telling you what justice demands. Meanwhile, Jason Lee sat in his own small apartment, overwhelmed by the flood of messages in his inbox. His live stream had become the centerpiece of the storm, and strangers praised him for exposing the truth. Yet guilt gnawed at him. He had become a witness. Yes, but he had also become a gatekeeper of someone else's trauma. He replayed Olivia's words in his mind. Visibility carries responsibility. For the first time, he wondered whether he was strong enough to carry that weight. He opened his laptop and began typing a public post I filmed in justice because I believed the world needed to see. But this is not my story. It belongs to Olivia and Chloe Grant. Please listen to them. Share their voices, not just my video. As he hit publish, a strange peace settled over him. Back in the conference room, Olivia's phone buzzed. She ignored it until a break was called, then glanced down. The caller ID displayed William Thompson. CEO of Whitfield's former company. She hesitated, then answered, Ms. Grant. Thompson's voice was strained, but earnest. I need to apologize for what my executive's wife has done. He's been terminated, and I want you to know we are taking this as a wake-up call. We want your guidance in repairing what's broken in our culture. Olivia's pause stretched long. She thought of Chloe asleep on the plane, of Margaret's smugness, of the way Captain Harris had dismissed her voice. Mr. Thompson, she said carefully, you'll need more than guidance. You'll need to decide if your company values convenience over justice, because if you choose convenience, this won't be the last crisis you face. He swallowed audibly. Then we'll choose justice, even if it costs us. Olivia ended the call, her jaw set with both weariness and resolve. The storm was spreading beyond one airline. This was becoming an industry reckoning. When she returned to Chloe later that evening, her daughter climbed into her arms with quiet urgency. Mommy, did they listen? Olivia pressed a kiss to her forehead. They heard. Whether they listened, we'll see. Chloe nodded thoughtfully, then held up her drawing again. I just want the airplanes to be fair. That's all. Olivia hugged her tighter, tears she had suppressed all day finally slipping free. For a moment, she allowed herself to grieve the innocence stolen from her child, even as she gathered strength for the battles ahead. The reckoning had only begun, but Olivia Grant was prepared to carry it to the very end. Morning dawned gray over New York City, but inside the glass towers of government and corporate offices, the storm was anything but dull. Olivia sat at the hotel breakfast table with Chloe still in pajamas, sipping juice while sketching another picture. This one showed a little girl holding a microphone, standing taller than a crowd of adults who leaned down to listen. Olivia stared at it, feeling both pride and unease. Her daughter was absorbing everything, even the unspoken tension. She wondered if Chloe would ever remember an ordinary trip, or if her memory of air travel would always be wrapped in this one painful lesson. The television in the corner of the dining area replayed the previous night's coverage. Commentators debated airline accountability, the role of social media, and the question of systemic bias. Civil rights leaders called for hearings in Congress. A senator had already announced she was drafting a bill to strengthen passenger protections. Olivia turned the volume down, not wanting Chloe to hear the harsh words directed at her family, but she could not silence the world. It had decided to make their pain a stage. Her phone buzzed again, a familiar rhythm she was beginning to dread. It was Rachel Kim, the junior flight attendant. Rachel's voice carried both nervousness and determination. Ms. Grant, I thought you should know. The airline is holding an emergency press conference this afternoon. They'll announce suspensions, maybe even firings, but I think they're also going to spin it as an isolated mistake. I couldn't stay silent. So I gave my testimony to the investigators. I told them exactly what happened. Olivia closed her eyes, grateful but cautious. You did the right thing. Rachel, speaking truth is never easy, but it's the only way change happens. Rachel's voice wavered. I hope they don't come after me for it. Olivia's tone softened. If they do, you won't stand alone. Across the city, at the airline's Manhattan office, executives rehearsed their lines. Linda Carver paced the floor, practicing with grim intensity. We acknowledge mistakes were made, but this was not reflective of our values. She recited. Her PR chief interjected. It won't be enough. The footage shows systemic failure. The country won't accept the few bad apples defense. Linda stopped pacing, shoulders stiff. Then what will they accept? The silence that followed was louder than any answer. Everyone in the room knew what was required: structural reform, not just apologies, but admitting that meant admitting liability, something the lawyers feared more than public outrage. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the Department of Transportation held its own emergency session. A senior official pointed to a screen filled with hashtags and engagement graphs. "This is not just a public relations scandal. This is a federal concern. We have jurisdiction over airline practices. We need to open a formal investigation." Around the table, heads nodded. One younger staffer leaned forward. "The public is already framing this as a civil rights issue. If we delay, we'll look complicit." The decision was unanimous. By noon, headlines would announce that the government was stepping in. Back at the hotel, Chloe tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Olivia crouched beside her daughter, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. The people who did wrong are. But sometimes, when you tell the truth, it makes a lot of noise. That's what's happening now." Chloe's brow furrowed in thought. "So all these people are listening because we didn't stay quiet?" Olivia nodded. "Exactly. And that means what happened to us can help other families, too." Chloe went back to her drawing, her small shoulders squaring with newfound importance. Olivia's heart swelled with both pride and sorrow. Childhood should not carry such burdens, yet here Chloe was, carrying them with grace. Across town, Margaret Whitfield sat in her apartment, blinds drawn against the daylight, her phone abandoned on the couch. She had stopped reading the comments days ago, but her mind still replayed the jeers, the threats, the condemnation. Thomas had left for his lawyer's office without a word, his silence colder than any shout. Margaret stared at her reflection in the darkened television screen. The woman looking back at her was no longer admired, no longer envied. She was infamous. And though she wanted to lash out, to reclaim the smug superiority she had worn like armor, the weight of isolation pressed too heavily. For the first time in years, she questioned whether the world she had built on entitlement had been nothing more than a fragile illusion. At midday, Olivia stepped into the back of a black sedan arranged by Daniel Cross. Reporters swarmed outside the hotel, microphones raised, voices shouting her name. She held Chloe's hand tightly as they moved through the chaos. Cameras flashed, questions blurred together, and Chloe pressed her face into her mother's side. Olivia kept walking, her expression calm but her pulse racing. She had faced hostile boards and aggressive negotiators, but this was different. This was personal, raw, and unpredictable. She felt the weight of millions of eyes waiting to see whether she would bend or stand tall. At the press conference, Linda Carver walked to the podium. The room was packed with journalists, cameras pointed like weapons. She adjusted the microphone, her voice steady. "Yesterday, an incident occurred on Flight 982 that does not reflect who we are as an airline. Passengers were treated unfairly. For that, we apologize." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Linda continued, "We have suspended the captain and lead flight attendant pending full investigation. We are implementing new training protocols effective immediately. And we have reached out to Ms. Olivia Grant to ensure she and her daughter receive direct restitution." A hand shot up from the front row. "Is this just about one family? Or is this about systemic bias in your company?" Linda hesitated. The camera zoomed closer. Every second of silence stretched like an eternity. "Finally," she said, "we acknowledge this incident reveals deeper issues, and we are prepared to work with outside voices to make sure this never happens again." It was not perfect, but it was a crack in the wall of denial. The crowd pressed harder. Is Olivia Grant here today? Will she speak backstage? Olivia had been listening. Her stomach knotted, but Chloe squeezed her hand. Mommy-o, you should tell them. Olivia looked down at her daughter's earnest eyes, then back at the stage. The decision was made. She stepped into the light, the room erupting with flashes and shouts. Linda stepped aside as Olivia approached the microphone. She stood tall, her voice clear. Yesterday, my daughter and I were humiliated because of the color of our skin. We were told our truth didn't matter. But thanks to witnesses, thanks to video, thanks to courage, the world saw what happened. And now you are all watching. I want you to understand, this is not about perks, or upgrades, or vouchers. This is about dignity. This is about every child who should never have to wonder if they belong on an airplane. Her words struck like lightning. Chloe stood at her side, looking out at the sea of cameras with wide but steady eyes. Olivia's voice softened, but the firmness remained. We will not accept empty apologies. We demand accountability, and we demand change. The room erupted with questions, but Olivia stepped back, taking Chloe's hand again. The cameras caught the image of mother and daughter walking off stage together, their silhouettes framed by harsh lights, their figures embodying both the wound and the hope of the moment. Across the world, screens replayed that image, and millions of viewers felt the sharp tug of recognition. Something had shifted. The story was no longer just a scandal. It was a reckoning. The weeks that followed the press conference were a blur of headlines, interviews, and endless meetings. Olivia often found herself moving between hotel lobbies, conference rooms, and airports that had suddenly become stages for scrutiny rather than places of transit. She had spent her career carefully crafting her image as a strategist, someone who let results speak louder than appearances. Now she was being thrust into a role she never auditioned for, but could not refuse the public face of an awakening. Chloe adapted more quickly than her mother expected. At school, classmates whispered about seeing her on television. Teachers treated her with a mix of admiration and caution, unsure how much to discuss with a 9-year-old who had unwittingly become a symbol. Chloe handled it with the straightforward honesty that had carried her through the ordeal. When one classmate asked if she was scared on the plane, she replied simply, "Yes, but Mommy held my hand, and that made it better." It was a child's truth, uncluttered and powerful, reminding Olivia that even in the chaos, her daughter's resilience was still the anchor. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to reshape itself before regulators and public opinion dismantled it. Linda Carver launched what the press quickly labeled the Chloe Protocol, a sweeping reform effort that promised to address bias at every level of the company. Training programs were rewritten, complaint systems redesigned, and a new division for equity and inclusion was established almost overnight. Critics scoffed, calling it reactive rather than visionary, but even they admitted the scope was unprecedented. Employees were no longer allowed to dismiss bias claims as misunderstandings. Every complaint triggered a documented review by independent auditors. Rachel Kim, the junior flight attendant who had supported Olivia and Chloe, was promoted into the first cohort of trainers, her testimony seen as a turning point in shifting the company's culture. Government action followed swiftly. Congressional hearings featured experts, civil rights leaders, and even Olivia herself, who sat before the panel with Chloe watching from the audience. Olivia's prepared statement was brief but piercing. She recounted not only her own experience, but those of countless others who had written to her in the days since the incident. She read letters from families forced off flights, from elderly passengers treated with disdain, from young professionals who had been told to calm down when they protested unfair treatment. Her voice never cracked, but her words landed like thunder. "If the skies are not safe for every passenger," she told them, "then they are not truly free in Phoenix." Thomas Whitfield sat in a sparse office borrowed from his attorney, facing a future he had never imagined. Margaret had withdrawn completely, retreating to her parents' house in another state. His career was in ruins, his reputation shredded, his phone silent except for calls from journalists eager for a soundbite. He gave them none. At night he scrolled through footage of Olivia's testimony, a bitter knot twisting in his stomach. He could not deny the truth of what had happened, but part of him still seethed at how quickly power had shifted away from him. For the first time in his life, he was on the wrong side of consequence, and it frightened him more than he cared to admit. Jason Lee, the accidental journalist whose live stream had ignited the storm, found himself navigating his own transformation. Invitations poured in from networks and podcasts, offers to turn his platform into a career. Yet he resisted the temptation to make himself the star. He remembered Olivia's warning about responsibility. Instead, he used his visibility to amplify other stories of injustice, becoming a reluctant but committed advocate. At a rally in Los Angeles, he told the crowd, "I'm not the hero of this story. I just pressed record. The heroes are the ones who endured the injustice and still found the courage to speak." His humility resonated, and his influence grew not as a celebrity, but as a trusted witness. Inside Olivia's own company, Grant Analytics, the impact was profound. Clients who once viewed them as a niche data firm now sought them out for expertise in bias detection and corporate accountability. Requests came from airlines, tech companies, and even federal agencies. The work was overwhelming, but Olivia embraced it with the same quiet ferocity she had shown in boardrooms for years. She insisted on building systems that could not be manipulated, analytics that revealed patterns of exclusion even when individuals tried to hide them. Her team called it truth technology, a phrase that captured both its power and its danger. Truth, after all, left no room for comfortable denial. Still, Olivia battled moments of doubt. In quiet hours, she wondered if the sudden spotlight would burn her, or if she could channel it into lasting reform. She worried about Chloe, about the weight her daughter carried too young. She worried about the people who wanted her silenced, about the subtle threats that arrived in anonymous emails. At night, when the city lights flickered outside hotel windows, she sometimes felt the edges of fear press against her strength. But each time, Chloe's presence grounded her. The child's steady questions, her drawings filled with hope, reminded Olivia why she could not step back. This was no longer just about her dignity. It was about the future her daughter deserved. One evening, weeks after the press conference, Olivia stood on a stage in Chicago at a conference for transportation equity. The ballroom was filled with executives, policymakers, and activists. She looked out at the sea of faces and began with a story, not statistics. She told them about Chloe clutching her hand on the plane, whispering, "Why don't they believe us?" The room fell silent, the weight of the child's question pressing against every adult conscience present. Olivia let the silence stretch before she continued. "That question should haunt every decision you make. Because until the answer changes, none of us have done our job." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Olivia knew applause was not enough. What mattered was action. After the conference, she received word that 3 more airlines were adopting the Chloe Protocol, and the Department of Transportation planned to expand oversight measures nationwide. Progress was uneven, contested, and incomplete. but it was progress nonetheless. She allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction, not for herself, but for Chloe, whose drawings were becoming bluer, brighter, filled with rainbows and smiling passengers, rather than storm clouds. In the quiet of their hotel room that night, Chloe crawled into bed beside her mother. "Mommy," she whispered, "do you think the airplanes are safer now?" Olivia wrapped an arm around her, kissing the top of her head. "Safer than they were, baby, and getting safer every day." Chloe smiled drowsily, her eyes fluttering shut. Olivia lay awake a while longer, staring at the ceiling, listening to her daughter's breathing. She thought about the journey from that humiliating moment on Flight 982 to this fragile, powerful momentum. The transformation was real, but it was also fragile. It required vigilance, resilience, and relentless truth. She promised herself she would not let it fade. The world was beginning to change, and Olivia Grant was determined to make sure it would not change back. 18 months after Flight 982, the story that had begun with humiliation in a narrow airplane aisle had spread across oceans and industries. Olivia stood behind a podium in Geneva, the emblem of the United Nations shimmering above her. Delegates from dozens of countries leaned forward in their seats. Some took notes, some whispered to aides, but most simply listened, their faces reflecting the gravity of what she carried in her voice. She began not with statistics or policy jargon, but with Chloe's words. "Why don't they believe us?" she repeated, her tone deliberate and steady. That question, asked by a child, has now shaped laws, reshaped corporations, and altered how entire industries operate. But let me be clear, the transformation is not complete. Progress is real, but it is fragile, and the question still lingers in too many spaces where people of color are expected to endure indignity in silence. The translator's voices echoed her words across the chamber. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, but Olivia kept her expression calm. Applause was not the goal. Change was. From her seat in the front row, Chloe clapped too, though her small hands could not match the roar of hundreds. At 11 years old, she had grown taller, her face sharper with maturity, yet her eyes still held that same unflinching clarity. She wore a simple white dress and a badge that read Youth Delegate, a gesture offered by the conference organizers who insisted her presence mattered as much as any official. Chloe had protested shyly at first, but Olivia had explained, "They want to hear you because you helped all this begin." That seemed to ease her discomfort. Still, she preferred sketching in the margins of the program booklet, doodling airplanes with rainbow tails that soared over cities without turbulence. The impact of that one day on Flight 982 had multiplied far beyond even Olivia's cautious expectations. In the United States, the Chloe Protocol had been implemented across all major carriers. Every bias complaint triggered independent review. Passenger rights councils were formed in multiple cities, and new accountability technology tracked interactions to prevent incidents from being swept aside. Reports showed passenger satisfaction rising, particularly among communities that had long felt marginalized in travel. More importantly, children and families could fly without carrying the same shadow of fear Olivia had seen etched in her daughter's face. But the changes did not stop at airlines. Corporations across industries had begun contracting Olivia's company, Grant Analytics, to design bias detection systems for hiring, promotions, and consumer treatment. Schools requested materials to help children understand fairness, using Chloe's simple questions as case studies in ethics classes. Civil rights groups celebrated the shift, though many warned that vigilance must never wane. Olivia herself repeated that warning wherever she spoke. Change was not permanent. It was a living effort that required nurturing, defending, and expanding. The personal cost, however, remained. Olivia's once private life had become public, every move scrutinized, every decision dissected. She had grown adept at navigating interviews and speeches, but sometimes she longed for anonymity, for the days when her greatest concern was a quarterly report rather than a global movement. Yet whenever she wavered, Chloe reminded her why she could not retreat. One evening, when Olivia had sighed heavily after a long day of meetings, Chloe had climbed into her lap and whispered, "Mommy, if you stop, who will keep asking the questions?" That was all it took. Olivia's resolve always returned. For Margaret Whitfield, the years that followed were marked by silence. She and Thomas had moved away from Phoenix, selling their home at a loss. Thomas never regained his career stature, working instead as a consultant with little influence. Margaret, once the center of social circles, avoided gatherings altogether. She lived in quiet anonymity, carrying the weight of a name that now drew scorn. Some said it was justice, others called it tragic, but Olivia rarely thought of her. She had long since learned that real justice was not measured in individual downfall, but in collective transformation. Rachel Kim thrived in her new role, overseeing cultural training across international routes. Her calm insistence on truth had become a model for other crew members, and she often invoked Chloe's words in sessions with staff. "Children see clearly," she would tell them. "If a 9-year-old can recognize injustice, so can you. The difference is whether you choose to act." Her career had blossomed, but more importantly, her influence shaped thousands of interactions in the skies every day. Jason Lee, the live streamer whose footage had ignited the fire, had transformed into a journalist dedicated to documenting injustice. His series on transportation equity won awards, but he remained humble, always reminding audiences that his role was never to center himself but to amplify voices like Olivia's. He and Olivia stayed in occasional contact, their relationship defined by mutual respect. He still remembered her admonition, "Visibility carries responsibility." He lived by it. The captain, William Harris, and lead attendant Susan Parker had both been permanently removed from passenger service. Harris flew cargo for a small charter company, his once promising career a cautionary tale. Susan took early retirement, never fully addressing her role in the ordeal. Their names occasionally surfaced in debates about accountability, but they faded into obscurity as the world moved forward. Olivia never celebrated their downfall. She carried too much discipline for that. But she also never forgot the consequences of silence and complicity. As Olivia left the UN podium and joined Chloe in the aisle, reporters swarmed. Chloe pressed closer to her mother, who bent down to whisper, "Smile. But remember, this isn't about us. It's about everyone watching." Chloe nodded, her grip firm on her mother's hand. They walked together toward the exit, their image captured by countless cameras. That image would soon travel the world, a mother and daughter, side by side, symbols of both pain and resilience, of humiliation turned into reform. Later that evening, from their hotel overlooking Lake Geneva, Chloe leaned on the balcony rail, staring at the mountains in the distance. "Mommy," she asked softly, "do you think what happened on that plane was worth it?" Olivia joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She chose her words carefully. "What happened to us should never have happened. It was wrong, and it hurt. But because the truth came out, things are changing, and if those changes keep even one other child from feeling the way you did, then we have turned something terrible into something meaningful." Chloe was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Then maybe it was worth it. But I still wish it never happened. Olivia kissed the top of her head. So do I. Sweetheart. So do I. As the night deepened, Olivia reflected on the journey. The incident on Flight 982 would always mark them, but it had also become something larger. A reminder that justice can emerge from unexpected places, that children's questions can cut through layers of adult denial, and that dignity is not negotiable. The legacy of that day was still being written, but one truth was clear. The skies were not the same anymore, and neither were they. And as Chloe drifted to sleep inside the quiet hotel room, Olivia allowed herself the rare gift of hope. Hope that her daughter's world would be fairer than the one she had inherited. Hope that courage, once spoken, could not be silenced. Hope that from a single moment of injustice, a legacy of justice had begun to take flight. And so, the story of Flight 982 comes to a close. What started as a painful moment of discrimination became something far greater, a reminder that justice can take flight, even in the unlikeliest of places. Olivia Grant refused to stay silent. Her daughter, Chloe, asked the question that millions of adults were too afraid to confront. Together, they forced corporations, governments, and entire industries to face an uncomfortable truth that dignity cannot be optional and fairness cannot be negotiable. But as inspiring as this story is, it's also a warning. Prejudice did not disappear the day Olivia and Chloe stood up. It still lingers, waiting in quiet corners, waiting in silence, which leaves us with a question we cannot ignore when the next injustice unfolds before our eyes. Will we stay seated, or will we rise if this story moved you? Let it be more than a story. Let it be a challenge. Share it. Talk about it. And never forget that even a child's voice can shift the course of history. Don't forget to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more true stories of courage and justice. Together, we can keep the skies and the world fair for everyone.